welcome to the next episode of Match Memories. It's been a little while since I've done one for one reason or another, but here we are back on the veranda of the tackle room to go through one of my biggest domestic match wins. As a lot of you know that are fans of the Match Memories, a lot of the ones that I've done have been from years and years ago, but I'm going to bring you right up to date with my latest big win, and that is the Fish South final at Southend Farm. The journey obviously started, it's an event that's only been run for a couple of years, and last year I was lucky enough to qualify and get into the final, and I actually ended up second, and it really did light my fire as far as wanting to win this event and get it on my CV along with the others. So the journey started obviously way back last year, booking the tickets. I didn't book too many for before Christmas, but I had one for everyone after. And I was definitely going to put a lot of effort in, as like I say, I was desperate to get back to that final in March this year. Fished 2 or 3 qualifiers, it didn't really go to plan. Fished one at Viaduct where my peg was just iced over, and I was wondering, is this just a sign where I shouldn't be putting the effort in practicing and travelling? But luckily on my second visit to Viaduct, I drew a nice peg 29. Had a real good match, weighed in about 32 pound of skimmers, and this was enough to win the qualifier and book myself in for a place in the final, obviously later on in March the following year, which is now this year. So like I say, really over the moon to get into this final. It's one that if you've been involved in, a lot of people go and watch. It really is a good final, and Southend is probably, I would say, the best silverfish venue that I've fished. It's fished a little bit worse than it did the last year, but I think a lot of places have suffered for that for one reason or another. But it's a fantastic place. It's run very professionally, nice and clean and tidy. The fish are in brilliant nick, and you can nearly always get a few bites there. Did actually fish a couple of qualifiers there, didn't draw that well, but like I say, did manage to qualify at Viaduct a little bit later on. So now we're at the final. Unfortunately, the 2 weeks before the final, I did suffer with a little bit of flu, and there was a 2-day match there that unfortunately I had to pull out of, but I did manage to fish the Wednesday before and obviously the Saturday before, which I always felt were the 2 most important matches as far as practicing. On the Saturday one, I drew peg 12, no, peg 11. It's quite deep there, but it's a nice place to practice as there's a bit of a mixture of size of fish. I did have a cold wind straight in my face, which made pellet fishing on the long pole very difficult. I did manage to catch a few fish short, work a few things out. Dead maggots were good. And it might sound a little bit silly, but you didn't want big dead maggots. You wanted smaller maggots so you could get 2 or 3 on a hook. Big dead red maggots are more suited to carp, and these skimmers and bream, I just found that a small dead red maggot was really good. I only fish with Advantage Baits green bream, which as you all know is my #1 mix when I'm fishing commercials for silverfish. I can't fault it, I never question it, and in my eyes it's the best bream skimmer ground bait that there's been for commercial silverfish fishing. So like I say, I won my section on the Saturday before. I was over the moon with that, caught about 25 pound. Returned obviously on the Wednesday. This was going to be, the most important practice. And in matches gone by and years gone by at Southend, you've been able to feed little bits of bait every cast, fish with a pot on your pole, but it just didn't seem the same to me this year. But a lot of anglers were still carrying on with this sort of trend and this way of fishing. I just didn't feel it was right. I felt there was less fish feeding, they were bigger fish, and you could almost set traps by putting in X amount of pellets and waiting an hour, going on it and trying to have a good run of fish. So my last practice match on the Wednesday, this is the route I went down. I actually drew peg 10, which was next to where I was the match before, but that was it didn't bother me even though I was in the same bit of the lake. The wind had swung round, it was off my back. And again, I managed to catch a few fish short, but the difference was by feeding more micro pellets, but less often on that long pole, I was able to get a couple of good runs of fish, and I actually won that end of the lake and the section again with around 25, 26 pound. Now the plan has definitely started to formulate. Ground bait short and in the edge if you've got any cover, and then pellets long, but looking to fish quite positive. Not feed as often, but feed more. And I definitely felt, looking around the lakes, you know, a lot of people weren't doing this. I'd only done it on one match, but that's all I really needed to give me the green light to have a good go. It's a final where you want to win, you know, £10,000 to the winner. So I'm going to take some chances, and I'm definitely going to be going for it. And I felt this was a real strong sort of method I had that a lot of anglers weren't doing. So come the final, obviously very important. One of the first things is to get a decent draw, a peg where you feel like you've got a chance. As I arrived on the lake on the day, from the car park bank, the wind was right to left. And I really didn't want to be in the wind because of my experiences in the practice match. I wanted to be out the wind where I could present my bait and fish nice and long and fish very, very accurately without the wind sort of disturbing me. Come the draw, I drew peg 20, which was permanent peg 25. A really good peg. You've got a little bit of a gap to your right. There was a few pegs I fancied. Pegs 1, 31. Obviously mine was one of them. The peg to my left, because you've got a nice bit of cover. But I was more than happy, and the wind was sort of off our back and I could fish really nice. I plumbed up 3 lines, all with the new commercial floats that will be available soon. One down by the tree, you've got a bit of cover, a bit of a throwaway. When it's warm, you can catch big weights there. And then at the bottom of the shelf in front of me, I was going to start on pellets and then change that to ground bait and maggots. And then long was just going to be my pellet line, setting a trap and looking for a couple of runs of fish. The match started. I put 200ml of micro pellets on the long pole, a small ball of ground bait on the top 6, and I didn't feed the edge line as I didn't want to build up a bank of bait there before the fish arrived. Had quite a slow start, short, caught 1 or 2 skimmers, 1 decent one and a few roach. Then after about 40 minutes I made the decision to go long. Caught 1 small skimmer the size of my hand, didn't really have any signs. So then I put another 100ml of micros, just spread out in a little area. So those bigger fish, you don't want it all on a sixpence when they come in your peg. So spreading it out over about a 2-foot square area. Came short, nothing really, just an odd fish, and it was fishing hard. Went long 20 minutes later, and exactly what I needed to happen to give myself a chance happened. I had a run of quality fish. I probably caught £10 in about 25 minutes, some quality bream and some big skimmers, and I really felt I was on my way. It all went a bit funny, so again I measured out 100ml of micro pellets, fed it again, came short, and I started to catch an odd fish short, and immediately I knew that feeding an amount of bait and leaving it 25, 20 minutes, that was definitely working. And it was a real confidence booster, because what I'd found out in practice was actually coming to, you know, to work in the match itself. And I just carried on alternating lines. I did change the short line after about 2 hours to some ground bait, dead maggots and a few chopped worms, but didn't really catch there. And this is where match fishing and experience comes into it, because with around about an hour and 50 minutes to go, I felt I was in front. I couldn't really catch close, and other anglers that hadn't caught so well early were starting to catch in close. And I honestly think that I can sit here and say to you that 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have won this final, because I would have just stayed close. Other people were catching, and I'd have tried to make it work. But through some of the experience I've gained, I definitely feel that I made a decision that ultimately ended up winning me this competition. And that was with about an hour and 3/4 to go. I felt I just needed to consolidate my lead, to catch something, to keep putting fish in the net. So I went back long, and I just lifted and dropped my float, fished a 4x14s, one of our new chimps. Nice thick top float, but dotted right down. And in 50 minutes I caught 4 fish for about £8. Came short just to finish the match and caught an odd one. But that 45 minutes where I just concentrated long and winkled out those 4 quality fish for around about £8. Always felt that was a really good move, and that was my experience coming to the fore and definitely making the right decision. As the match finished, obviously word on the street was that I'd done well, but there was also, you know, a couple of other guys, Zach Brown in particular, Andy Cranston, a few other people that were admitting to around about £30, and I thought I probably had £35, maybe even a little bit more. When the scales came round to me, Zach Brown had weighed in £37, Andy Cranston 36, and there was also a 35. I really had the feeling that I'd probably just done enough, but you can never be too sure. They're decent fish at Southend Farm, and they do weigh quite heavy. Put my fish on the scales and it went round to £45, and I was absolutely delighted. There were a few more pegs to weigh in, but I could sort of see those anglers, and I felt that they hadn't caught quite well enough to accumulate that sort of weight. £26 was top on that right hand bank, and I can't really tell you the sort of feeling I had, because I'd set my stall out from the year before. It was an event I wanted to win, and it hadn't taken me that long the next year. I'd worked very hard in practice. I'd thought about it a lot. I'd analysed the feeding and analysed what other people were doing. And it had really paid off. You don't always get it right, but this one, thankfully for me, the way that I worked out the feeding and actually executing it in the match went 100% to plan. I only lost 1 fish all day. And I always talk about in my fishing, whether it's articles, videos, or talking to people on the bank. Obviously, feeding and timings is of utmost importance. You know, you don't have to, you know, fish with, you know, the best float or the, you know, the best hook or the this or the that. If your feeding and your timings are bang on, then fishing is all of a sudden going to become a lot easier. And it's something I do talk about in depth on my coaching days and other days I do, and when I'm talking about people. So always, please bear that in mind. Like I say, far from it, I don't always get it right, but those days you can, obviously it can make a massive difference. When you look at the field in the Fish South final this year, it was unbelievable. Anglers like, you know, Paul Holland, Andy Cranston, Darren Davis, Robbie Taylor, Alex Clements, I can go on and on, Ben Hagg, Andy Powers, Mikey Williams, you know, John Harvey, anglers like that, and it really did take some winning. But like I say, everything all pulled together. I had a good draw, good tactics, and managed to execute it reasonably well, and not make any mistakes. And that's what you've got to do in these finals. Come the presentation, it was fantastic. You know, it's what I'd sort of dreamed of. Yes, obviously the World and Europeans are the biggest events I fish, but domestic events like the Fish South Silvers and the Fish South Carp are just fantastic. I have to give John Cook a major thanks for running these events. He really is so important to match fishing in the south. And also Southend Farm, it's a fantastic fishery run by lovely people. They always make me feel very welcome. Only the other day I did a teaching there, and it just meant something for me to win there. The guys there have always been nice, and, you know, really sort of, you know, just nice and sort of made me feel at home, and that's very, very important, and I've always liked it there. So big thanks not only to John Cook but to Southend Farm, and also all the sponsors of the event, and also everybody that fishes them. I know how important it is for a lot of people to qualify. Lots of people try, and like I say, you've just got to be lucky on the day, draw the peg, and obviously have it go your way to get your spot in the final. But they're fantastic qualifying events, and if you do manage to get to the final, it will definitely be a day you'll remember. Well, like I say, that's the next edition of my match memories. It was a brilliant win for myself, but more importantly, it's nice to sit here and run you through the sort of thinking behind the feeding tactics and everything else, and all that went into it and the way I qualified. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of my match memories. I'm not going to leave it as long next time to do the next one, so make sure you keep your eye peeled.